Right on time, as usual. Come in. The old floorboards have their moods, and the fire's already crackling. I've just pulled a file from the archive that's been humming faintly for days. You know the kind. Thick with moss, reluctant to be opened, and heavier than it should be. Tonight's entry. It doesn't howl. It doesn't fly. It doesn't drip or slither or vanish. It walks, slowly, purposefully, one heavy step after another, through a forest that no longer trusts its maps. You already know the name, Bigfoot, or Sasquatch, skunk ape, yeti, yowie, hairy man. The details shift depending on the forest, the folklore, or the reporter's coffee. But the shape never changes. Towering, shaggy, half forgotten, half believed. Before the bumper stickers and grainy footage, he lived in silence, in the uneasy gaps between tribal warnings and settler tales, in stories that didn't ask to be told, they insisted. So tonight, we'll dust off the early sketches, the stories carved into bark, passed in low voices across campfires that never felt warm enough. We'll follow the trail, through myths, maps, and the spaces where science shrugs. Because Bigfoot isn't just a creature. He's a question we still ask in the dark, a shadow just outside the reach of logic. And maybe the part of ourselves we lost when we stopped walking slowly through the trees. If you enjoy these quiet investigations, if the firelight feels right and the stories make the dark a little softer, feel free to leave a like or subscribe. It helps keep the archive from growing cold. And if there's a particular monster you'd like me to open a file on next, just leave it in the comments. I do read them, usually with a blanket, and something steaming in a mug I can't quite identify. Now, the fire's warm, the night's patient, and the forest, well, it's been waiting. We're opening the Bigfoot file tonight, and he may already know. The forest doesn't start with trees, it starts with stillness. Before the first step, before the first sound, there is only hush, the kind of hush that sits heavy in the air, like a blanket too thick to see through. The kind of hush that makes animals pause mid-step and tilt their heads as though listening for a sound they shouldn't hear. And in that hush, something stirs. You don't see it, not at first. Just a tremble in the fern bed, a shift in the underbrush, a flicker of shadow that doesn't match any branch you can find. Then, a shape. Not a predator, not prey, something else. Too tall for a bear, too smooth for a man, covered in something between fur and shadow, moving with a silence that doesn't match its size. This is where the story of Bigfoot begins, not in a journal or newspaper clipping, but in a primal recognition. Something's out there, and it's watching back. For many of the First Nations peoples of the Pacific Northwest, this shape wasn't just a creature. It was a neighbor, a spiritual one, sometimes a protector, sometimes a warning, sometimes both. The Tsetsail people speak of Saskets, a guardian of the mountain forests, whose name gave us Sasquatch. To the Lumi, he was Tsemekwes, not a monster, but a wild being, sacred and elusive. In Salish tales, he was neither beast nor man, but a presence who chose when to be seen and when to be forgotten. He didn't attack, he didn't destroy, he simply existed, just out of reach, always bigger than your memory could hold. There are stories passed down about children who wandered too far into the trees, only to return days later with no wounds. Just wide eyes and stories of a tall, silent figure who followed them home, then turned and vanished. He was not named with fear. but with awe, which, in the old world, is sometimes worse, because awe demands reverence, and reverence can sour into fear. What do you do with a creature that defies explanation? One that walks like you, but better, that hides not out of shame, but choice. You tell stories, around fire circles, in whispered warnings, in bark carvings, in lullabies that sound suspiciously like "don't go too far from the fire." You turn it into a shape in the ferns, a thing that doesn't need proof because you feel it every time you step past the tree line and realize you're not alone. We haven't even gotten to settlers yet, or hoaxes, or tabloids. That all comes later. For now, the story begins here, in the hush, in the moss, in the first shiver of recognition, when the forest suddenly feels aware. Long before he was called Bigfoot, he already had cousins. Across the world, in places with deep woods and deeper memory, tales of forest giants grew like mushrooms after rain. You'll find them everywhere. Different names, similar shapes. In medieval Europe, they were the woodwoes, hairy wild men roaming outside the boundaries of civilized law, sometimes sacred, sometimes feared, often painted into cathedral carvings as a warning. This is what happens when man forgets his soul and returns to the trees. In Siberia and Mongolia, Almas. In Tibet, Mehte, the high-altitude cousin to the Yeti. In Australia, Yowies creep through eucalyptus forests. Even in Central Africa, the Kongamato and Kikomba bring echoes of bipedal shadows darting through the underbrush. And what unites them? Size, hair, silence, distance. They are always out there, always half legend, and always just barely not human. Some scholars say these creatures are memory ghosts of extinct hominids, Neanderthal echoes, fossil folk stories, a pre-human collective memory that lives on in our caution around caves and shadows. Others say they're symbols, metaphors, a reaction to rapid civilization, a reminder of what waits when you step off the path. But what if they were neither? What if they simply persisted? What if the forest giants never left? What if we were the ones who stopped visiting? Before settlers brought paper and ink to the forest, stories were passed in cedar smoke and rhythm, in names not easily translated, in warnings delivered not in fear, but in reverence. To the native peoples of the Pacific Northwest, Sasquatch wasn't just a creature, he was a presence. The Tlingit feared him as Kushtaka, the land otter man, shapeshifter and forest thief. The Hoopa people speak of Oma, a massive being who lived in the mountains and could vanish like fog. In some regions, he was a guardian. In others, a taker of children. In still others, a watcher, silent, neutral, unbothered unless disrespected. But what united the tribes was this: they never doubted he was real, and they never said his name lightly. Carvings were left at the edges of paths as markers, not barriers, but acknowledgements. You do not walk these woods thinking you're alone. You walk as a guest. Many tribal elders tell of how the creatures only appear to those with respect. Children, sometimes. The lost. The kind. Rarely the armed. That makes sense, doesn't it? He's a forest creature, after all. And forests know who's listening. When European settlers arrived in the Pacific Northwest, they brought rifles, ink, and the quiet conviction that anything unknown should either be mapped or feared. The forests unsettled them, not because of what they saw, but because of what they couldn't. Trees too tall to see the sky, soundless ravines, trails that ended where they began, And stories. So many stories. Journals from the 1800s speak of howls at night, unidentifiable footprints, livestock found torn but not eaten, tents slashed without entry, trees snapped clean 6 feet up, and no sign of a bear. In 1884, a Canadian newspaper told of Jacko, a creature captured near Yale, British Columbia, described as a half-human, half-ape child. It was caged. It was poked. Then, as the story always goes, it vanished. The American mind, ever industrial, sought explanation. Ape escapee, hermit, hoax. But still the stories mounted. Camps heard knocking sounds at 2 a.m. Trappers returned with shoes torn off their feet. A miner once claimed a group of hairy men stole his supplies, but left the Bible. They didn't know what it was, but they knew something was out there. And unlike the bears, it wasn't afraid of fire. The oldest myths are not spoken. They're drawn. Across rock walls, in ash and ochre, long before alphabets. And sometimes those drawings include something unexpected, a bipedal form, tall, broad, surrounded by deer and human hunters, but never hunting, just standing, watching, footprints carved into cliff faces, petroglyphs with hands too large for any known primate, cave etchings of giants beside rivers that don't run anymore. In the Lovelock Caves of Nevada, tales were told of red-haired giants who terrorized tribes until they were trapped inside the caves and burned. The bones, some said, were found, then lost or hidden. Is this myth? Is it metaphor? Or are we looking at the first attempts to record what words couldn't yet describe? A presence that defied being erased. A footprint before language. The deeper you went into the woods, the more things changed. The light shifted, the sounds thinned out, and the logging camps, they noticed. In the early 20th century, as logging companies chewed their way through the Pacific Northwest, stories began to pile up like splintered timber. Not official ones, not in any safety reports, just murmurs over tin mugs, told while boots dried by the stove and the forest crept close again. Footprints, broken branches 10 feet high, echoes that followed men back to camp without ever stepping into sight. They called them wild men at first, or giants, or sometimes the boys up on the ridge, a phrase that needed no explanation, because everyone already felt like they were being watched. In 1924, near Mount St. Helens, a group of prospectors claimed they were attacked by a band of ape-like men during the night. Rocks hurled down a canyon, shadows in the trees. When they returned, sweating, shaken, sleep-deprived, they told the story to a local paper. The paper gave the place a new name, Ape Canyon. More reports trickled in through the 30s and 40s, from loggers, from trappers, from the quiet-eyed men who knew the woods better than any map could suggest. They weren't afraid of wolves or bears, but they didn't like being followed by something that didn't leave prints, until it did. Not one man claimed to get a clear look, and those who claimed they did, they never told the story the same way twice. October 20th, 1967. 2 men, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin, were on horseback along Bluff Creek, Northern California. Patterson, armed with a handheld 16mm camera, was hoping to make a documentary. What he captured instead would ignite a legend. The film is only 59 seconds long, but it changed everything. The creature, female by most accounts, lumbers across a gravel bar, turns her head, looks directly into the lens, then disappears into the trees. We've all seen it. That famous frame, the mid-stride glance, grainy, wobbly, strange. and yet unforgettable. It was unlike other hoaxes. The proportions were too specific. The gait was weirdly natural. The muscle movement under the fur, suspiciously real. Scientists, skeptics, and believers have spent decades analyzing those few frames, claiming costume, claiming authenticity, claiming nothing at all. To this day, no one's definitively proven it's a hoax, but no one's proven it's real either, which, in the world of monsters, is just about the sweetest spot you can occupy. It made Bigfoot mainstream, and he never left. With fame comes fabrication. After the film, sightings exploded. Every third cousin's neighbor had a Bigfoot story. Plastic footprints appeared at campgrounds. Teenagers donned gorilla suits and sprinted across roads at night. National Enquirer made Bigfoot a household name, for all the wrong reasons. And yet, the genuine reports didn't stop. Some were just too detailed, too grounded. They came from hunters, police officers, biologists, not just bored campers. There was the 1972 case of a family near Willow Creek who recorded strange vocalizations echoing through the night, eventually dubbed the Sierra Sounds, long, drawn-out whoops and mumbling gibberish in a tone no local wildlife could explain. Bigfoot became two things at once, a joke and a witness. A creature dismissed at the dinner table, but still watched for from the kitchen window. He joined the ranks of American folk monsters. Paul Bunyan, Johnny Appleseed, the Mothman, a patchwork of myth and media. Only Bigfoot felt alive, because he was never in one place. He was in all of them, walking away. Just when you thought you might get proof, it always comes back to the prints, dozens, hundreds, left in snow, in river mud, in volcanic ash. Some were fakes, wooden cutouts, oversized rubber boots. But others, they puzzled even seasoned trackers. Too deep for a hoax, too far apart for a prank, anatomically odd. Toes spread differently, mid-foot flexibility like no modern primate. In 1982, Dr. Grover Krantz, a physical anthropologist, analyzed casts showing something called a mid-tarsal break, a foot flexibility humans no longer have but primates do. He argued no hoaxer would fake biomechanics. He submitted papers. He was laughed at, but he kept the casts. He taught his dog to bark at skeptics. Prints with dermal ridges, fingerprint-like texture surfaced in the Pacific Northwest. No known hoaxer could replicate them. So the question lingers, why leave a footprint if you don't want to be found? Or worse, what if it wants to be found, just long enough to prove it was real? Then it vanishes again, like it never was. By the late 1970s, Bigfoot wasn't just a forest rumor. He was everywhere. Saturday morning cartoons, toy shelves, gas station bumper stickers, gone squatchin' hats and refrigerator magnets. But something strange happened. People still believed. Despite the jokes, despite the hoaxes, something about him stuck. Something real. Because even as the caricature grew, so did the unease. He remained unproven, unfinished. A file left open. People started seeing him less as a monster and more as a symbol of wilderness, of the unknown, of the parts of the world we still don't own. He became something almost holy, not a god, not a ghost, but a quiet reminder that some mysteries deserve to remain mysteries. And maybe, just maybe, he liked it that way. There are creatures that science loves, ones that can be measured, labeled, pickled in jars, and displayed in museums with polite little placards. Bigfoot is not one of those creatures. He lives in the cracks, which is precisely why cryptozoology was invented. A field built for animals that shouldn't exist, and yet keep showing up in stories, rumors, and sometimes even blurry photographs. To be clear, mainstream science doesn't recognize cryptozoology. It's seen as folklore at best, pseudoscience at worst, a field more associated with enthusiast blogs than university grants. But still, it keeps going, because the wilderness keeps whispering. Champ, the Jersey Devil, Mokele Mbembe, the Loch Ness Monster, and of course, Sasquatch. Cryptozoologists collect stories the way botanists collect leaves, footprint casts instead of feathers, hair samples instead of fossils. They may not be taken seriously by the ivory tower, but they take the mystery seriously. They go into the field with tape measures, wildlife cameras, and too much coffee. And sometimes they come back with something that shouldn't exist. A scream no animal can be matched to. A print with a pressure depth no human could fake. A hair sample that defies classification. They build maps, patterns, migration theories, hypotheses. They call Bigfoot a relic hominid, possibly a surviving population of Gigantopithecus, a massive ape thought extinct in Asia 100,000 years ago. It's not so different from the coelacanth, a fish believed extinct for 65 million years, until it was caught off the coast of South Africa in 1938. Or the okapi, once thought mythical, now fully catalogued. Maybe Sasquatch is just a little more stubborn. Maybe the file doesn't fit the cabinet because the cabinet is too small. Footprints are fickle. They vanish in rain. They distort in snow. They invite doubt like a porch light invites moths. But some Bigfoot prints refuse to be ignored. In 1958, a bulldozer operator named Jerry Crew found enormous human-like footprints around his equipment in Bluff Creek, California. He made casts, took photos. The newspaper ran the story. They coined the name Bigfoot. Some years later, a family member claimed it was a hoax, and yet those casts remained odd, anatomically convincing. The stride between prints, nearly 7 feet. The pressure, consistent with a weight of 600 plus pounds. More followed. Some were obvious fakes, flat, cartoonish, symmetrical. But others had detail, shifting pressure points, midfoot flexibility, toe splay, even dermal ridges. Scientists like Dr. Grover Krantz and Dr. Jeff Meldrum began analyzing these prints seriously. Meldrum, a professor of anatomy and anthropology, has studied over 200 casts. He's called them biologically plausible, citing foot structure unseen in hoaxes. Skeptics say it's wishful thinking. Enthusiasts say it's suppressed science. And in between, a muddy riverbed in Washington holds another perfect print, waiting to dry, waiting to disappear. Then there's the physical evidence you can't step in. Hair samples, strange calls, tree markings, bent branches too high for any deer. Hundreds of hair samples have been collected over the years. Most come back bear, elk, or known primates, but a few, inconclusive. Not because they're alien, but because they're too close. Human-like, but not quite. Primate, but unmatchable. These are the samples that disappear into lab drawers labeled unresolved. And the sounds, the Sierra sounds, recorded in the 1970s by Ron Moorhead and Al Berry, remain some of the most debated pieces of evidence. Vocalizations unlike any known North American animal. Some scholars analyzed them for pitch, cadence, syntax, even suggesting language-like structure. The noises are eerie, warbled, sometimes aggressive, other times almost curious. Is it real? Is it hoax? Is it hope? Somewhere deep in the forest, there's a noise that doesn't match any field guide, and some part of us still wants it to be unidentifiable, because the known world is very small. But the unknown, that's where the forest begins. Why won't science take Bigfoot seriously? The answer is complicated. Because science, as an institution, demands a high standard of evidence, reproducibility, peer review, physical remains. And Bigfoot offers none of that. No bones, no bodies. Just blurry photos, shaky stories, and a haunting number of near misses. Academia has laughed at Bigfoot for decades. Papers on Sasquatch are rejected outright. Scholars who study him risk being branded fringe. But still, a few brave ones do. They argue absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, that the wilderness is still vast, that mountain lions were declared extinct in parts of the US long after they were quietly surviving. Some say science is too conservative. Others say Bigfoot believers refuse to let go. But in the middle lies the truth. We all want a mystery we can't control. We all want something in the world that isn't explainable. So science shrugs and walks away, and the prints stay behind. We fossilize the things we've finished with. Dinosaurs, saber-tooths, mammoths. But Bigfoot, he's still walking. He doesn't fossilize. He mythologizes. He survives not in bone, but in belief. That fragile, frustrating, beautiful thing that humans cling to when the world doesn't give us answers. Maybe he never left fossils because he was never meant to be found. Maybe he's an idea more than an animal, a footprint on the soul of the forest. In the end, no one agrees what he is. An ape, a spirit, a symbol, a mistake. But that's exactly why he matters. Because Bigfoot stays wild, untamed, unverified, unburied. And in a world of concrete and code, that might be the most human thing left. By the time the 1980s rolled around, Bigfoot wasn't just walking through forests. He was walking into living rooms. He showed up in cartoons, comedy sketches, children's picture books, plush toys. The monster had become cuddly. Movies like Harry and the Hendersons portrayed him not as a threat, but as a misunderstood, gentle giant. He liked snacks. He made sad eyes. He rode in station wagons, and audiences loved it. Because let's be honest, deep down, many of us don't want Bigfoot to be terrifying. We want him to be lonely, kind, majestic, a lost thing that just wants to be left alone. He became a symbol of misunderstood nature, a stand-in for the last bit of wildness we hadn't paved over, a folk hero who didn't fight dragons, just evaded traffic cameras. And this shift, it mattered. Because once Bigfoot became soft, people started feeling safer believing in him. They didn't need to fear ridicule. They could wear the t-shirt, carry the lunchbox, say, "I believe," and smile while saying it. He became the monster you could hug, and in doing so, he wandered into a strange place between myth and mascot, where he still walks. If the 1980s softened Bigfoot, the 1970s weaponized him. He was everywhere: tabloids, roadside murals, gas station novelties, even adult horror flicks. The decade embraced weirdness like it was a fashion statement, and Bigfoot fit perfectly. Cryptozoologists threw conferences. Amateur investigators roamed national parks with tape recorders and high hopes. Counterculture movements, already suspicious of government, science, and the man, gravitated toward the big, hairy outsider. He became a kind of rebel cryptid. Bigfoot wasn't polished. He wasn't televised like Nessie. He was raw, earthy, smelled like musk and moss. And he didn't care if you believed in him. Some said he was an alien. Others thought he lived in portals. Some called him the last Neanderthal. The theories spiraled like incense smoke. But all of it came from the same root, a yearning for something that wasn't tamed. In a world of polyester and parking lots, Bigfoot offered something older, dirtier, realer. He wasn't just a monster. He was a rejection of modern life. Somewhere between the blurry footage and the bobbleheads, Bigfoot became a brand. He sold beef jerky. He advertised insurance. He became the face of quirky festivals and hiking clubs. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because while commercialism can dilute mystery, it can also preserve it. Ask any child who clutches a Bigfoot plushie, and you'll find someone already halfway to belief. We want to buy the unexplainable. Wear it on hats. Post it in memes. Signal to others. I, too, find comfort in the unknown. But beneath all that is something older. The missing link isn't just about evolution. It's about us. About our desire to bridge the gap between human and beast, modern and wild, logic and awe. And in a strange way, merchandising Bigfoot kept him relevant. He wasn't put in a museum. He wasn't solved and shelved. He was kept alive through keychains and campfire songs. And maybe that's a kind of immortality no fossil ever gets. Eventually, the culture turned cynical. Bigfoot became a meme, a punchline, the guy in the costume, the blurry photo that never gets clearer, the go-to example for people will believe anything. TV shows mocked him. Skeptics rolled their eyes. But here's the secret. The joke never quite landed. Because behind every snicker was still a flicker of what if. People laughed, but they still slowed down near thick woods. They still turned up the volume on night recordings. They still looked over their shoulder when hiking alone at dusk. Because Bigfoot isn't funny. Not really. He's persistent, quiet, and still unresolved. Even the mockery kept him alive. You can't joke about something that doesn't matter. And somehow, he still mattered. The laughter didn't erase him. It echoed into the trees. In the end, what does Bigfoot reflect? Us. He's the part of ourselves we're not sure we want to find. The part that walks barefoot through mud, that disappears when tracked, that chooses silence over spectacle. Some see a monster, some see a lost cousin, some see a metaphor for something deeper. But almost everyone sees something. Bigfoot holds a mirror up to modern life and shrugs. He doesn't care about being proven. He doesn't need to be caught. He exists in the pause before the answer, the quiet breath before certainty. In a world that prizes proof, Bigfoot is a poem, unrhymable, untamed, and that's why he stays. In a world of pocket cameras and 24/7 surveillance, you'd think Bigfoot would be caught by now. But no. Instead, we have more photos, more blurry videos, more shaky close-ups of leaves with a single, haunting shadow just out of frame. Trail cameras, those motion-activated eyes in the woods, have multiplied across the continent. Hunters, hikers, researchers, cryptid hunters. And sometimes they capture something strange. A tall figure in the distance, a silhouette that seems to move between frames. Glowing eyes at an impossible height. Sometimes it's a bear, sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes it's filed away in a folder called Unexplained. Drones have offered a new angle, eyes from above, but the forest is good at hiding. Tree cover swallows footage, fog rolls in, shadows win, and so Bigfoot continues to do what he does best: appear, almost, then vanish. You'd be surprised how many people still talk about Bigfoot. Late at night, on old message boards, Reddit threads, encrypted group chats, podcasts with 3 listeners and a warning not to share the location. There are maps pinning sightings, audio clips, grainy photos enhanced 100 times, arguments about stride length, habitat range, vocal pitch. Some forums are jokey, memes, merch. Squatchin' Saturdays. Others, dead serious. People share stories anonymously. A hiker who smelled something wrong and ran. A camper who heard breathing next to their tent all night though no one was there. A father who saw a figure cross the road in one step and never told his kids. The stories haven't stopped. They've just moved online. And while the algorithms may suppress them, the woods do not. Every few years, some outlet runs the same headline: why people still believe in Bigfoot. As if it needs an explanation. As if belief in something vast, quiet, and unseen is so strange in a world where we know everything and feel nothing. Belief in Bigfoot is belief in the unfinished, in the idea that not all pages have been turned, that not every mystery has been packaged and solved. He's the modern folk myth who refuses to fade. Not because the evidence gets stronger, but because our hunger for wonder never goes away. And for some, that belief isn't just curiosity, it's identity. Bigfoot believers aren't all tinfoil hat loners. They're teachers, hikers, parents, poets, people who once saw something or just felt something and never shook it. Belief doesn't need proof, it needs space. And Bigfoot gives us space to believe. Bigfoot isn't just a creature of the forest. He is the forest. The part that doesn't want to be found, that resists trails, ignores satellites, shrugs off search parties. He is the embodiment of everything we've tried to tame and haven't. He's the question: what happens when the wild refuses to go extinct? Many modern sightings take place near encroached habitats, logging zones, construction sites, places where the trees are being pushed back. It's as if Bigfoot appears to remind us this was never just your land, that something old lives here still, not hostile, not violent, just present and unwilling to be erased. And now, here we are, you, me, the fire, the story, and a question hanging in the dark like smoke. Do you believe in Bigfoot? You don't have to answer out loud. He wouldn't either. Because maybe the point was never whether he was real in flesh and fur. Maybe the point was that he's real enough to stay in stories, to creep through our dreams, to stand quiet and unbothered at the edge of what we know. He walks where certainty ends. And as long as there are forests and questions and people who glance just a second too long at the shadows, Bigfoot will remain, not solved, not found, just present, exactly where he wants to be. Well, that's all for tonight. The fire's down to soft coals now, glowing faint and warm like a heartbeat beneath the ash. The file's back where it belongs, slid gently into its place among the others, still humming a little, like it's not quite ready to sleep yet. But you are. We've walked a long trail tonight, through fern beds and folklore, logging roads and lab notes. We've seen the monster become a mirror, the myth become a mascot, and the shadow remain. Bigfoot hasn't changed much, but maybe we have. Maybe that's why he still matters. Because in a world that wants everything explained, weighed, tested, and proven, we still leave a little space for mystery. For the part of us that still listens at the edge of the forest, just in case something steps back. We don't need to catch him. It's enough to know he might be there, somewhere quiet, somewhere green, somewhere older than names. So, thank you for joining me tonight, for sitting by the fire, for letting your thoughts wander into mossy silence and the hush between footfalls. And if there's ever another creature you'd like to explore together, another monster whose file needs dusting off, well, you know where to find me. Until then, let the shadows stay soft, let the woods stay wild, and may all your monsters be just curious enough to keep watching from the trees. Good night, traveler.